Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Chris Sost, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into a new episode of the Gig Economy Lounge. Today I wanted to touch on a subject that has to do with the current battles that are either going on in New York City or California or anywhere else in the country. And that is, I think we've all forgotten the original fight between the idea of Uber and Lyft versus the very entrenched taxi, I'm going to use a very nice term, association. So the taxi driver associations across this country. And the reason why this topic came up to me is I actually just I just shared an article because it just came across my news feed that a federal appeals court has actually overturned a lower court ruling on New York City actually banning digital advertising inside of non-medallion holding for hire vehicles. So this is a blatant attack specifically against Uber and Lyft drivers. Now, most Lyft drivers or Uber drivers or rideshare drivers in general will say, well, that's messed up. And I would say, yes. And this is kind of where the TLC first started back in 2015. So there was a court decision a long time ago by a company that came up with digital advertising inside of rideshare cars, and the TLC was persuaded, well, let's just, for the lack of a better term, they were persuaded by the big pull of taxi companies to get this banned because yellow cabs are allowed to advertise. We advertise. Uber and Lyft shouldn't be allowed to advertise. So they successfully got their puppets, the TLC, to go ahead and put in a ban. So I just wanted to bring this up because there is a lot of people all across the country that are jumping on the bandwagon with either, state legislators, local regulators, the TLC, and they are championing these purchased groups that we would like to call either elected officials or, hired by elected officials to oversee the common good of people. But in reality, they're working for somebody much bigger than you as a rideshare driver and me. We don't have the money or the clout for them to actually care about the rideshare driver. Now, in a heated battle, they will utilize a rideshare driver's desperation and feeling of wrong to further their own agenda. And make no mistake about it, the TLC is working for the taxi and limousine drivers. They're not working for the rideshare drivers. As I put in the post, rideshare drivers are merely pawns to the TLC. Now, I know that the rideshare driver or, whatever the rideshare associations, they latched on to the teats of the TLC and championed the minimum wage and all that. But in the end, the TLC doesn't care whether rideshare drivers make minimum wage or not. That's not their concern. Their overtly blatant and obvious concern is how do we bring back the value of the medallions? How do we help the lenders who lent all this money to buy overpriced pieces of metal that goes on the tops of cars? That's who they work for. It happens I can't believe that some people are so short-sighted. And I guess if you're in the shit, I get it. But if you take a look from a bigger vantage point, everything that the TLC is doing is geared towards bringing Uber and Lyft down. And they'll do it any way they can. It's all about how do we reduce the usage of rideshare and push up the usage of taxi cabs and thus push up the value of taxi cab medallions. It's terrible. And I can only, I'm only speculating, but I truly believe that the politicians in California are doing the same thing. And what it is there are organizations out there, or there are groups of people, let's just say for hire drivers. They cannot compete with Uber and Lyft in the marketplace. They actually have no desire to even attempt to compete with Uber and Lyft in the marketplace. The only thing that they can do is utilize the money and the connections that they've made over the decades to leverage the government to bring these companies down. That's their best play. That's all they can do. They can't beat them in the market. That's obvious. Like I see that there's, small taxi cab companies going out of business every year. They have no desire to even attempt to compete. And it's a shame, because these taxi cab companies and drivers could be going to the city asking for less regulations on them to compete. That's what they could be doing. That's what I would be doing. If I was a for-hire livery driver, I would be fighting for less regulations on myself so I can compete against these other companies. But the simple fact of the matter is a taxi cab driver cannot charge a lower fare than that comes off of the meter. It's not like they can even compete in pricing. And I'm sure there's taxi cab drivers out there that overcharge, undercharge, and do all that stuff. But guess what? They're not supposed to, but they do. So I just wanted to do this episode and bring to light what these organizations or factions of local and state governments are doing in the bigger picture. And it shows through them continuing to fight to ban in-car advertising for rideshare drivers in New York City. So, for a lot of people out there, you may have heard of a company called, can't think of the name right now, Play Octopus. The name of the complainant in this case was Vugo, Vugo, which was kind of like the OG of in-car digital advertising. And it's a way for the drivers to make extra money. So for the longest time, there was no tipping in the app. Well, guess what? You could actually tip your Uber driver through the Vugo system, or however you pronounce that. So these mechanisms, all these market-based solutions for drivers to make more money, governments are trying to figure out how to restrict. No, rideshare drivers, they can't have that. We're going to force Uber and Lyft to raise their prices so that ride volume drops, and these rideshare drivers will make, minimum wage. And then these companies will be forced to put policies into place, such as Lyft is doing right now in New York City, where you can't just go online wherever you want, whenever you want. It's based off of the demand in that area at a given time. And then we're going to restrict drivers and say, hey, you can't drive below 96th Street in Lower Manhattan for more than 31% of every hour empty. And then we're going to charge a congestion tax. And then, we're just going to hammer you. We're going to nickel and dime. We're going to raise pricing through our policies. And who is this actually going to affect? It's going to affect, I don't want to say the poor, right? But I say budget conscious ridership. The very people that rideshare was honestly starting to help since 2016. I know there's a ton of affluent people out there that use Uber Pool. I get it. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people that, for one reason or another, took other modes of transportation. Hell, they probably walked, took public transit, whatever it was, to get where they needed to go. And because of Uber Pool, they were able to take a ride a few days a week, maybe not every day, but a few days a week, to make their lives just a little bit easier. Guess what? Those are the people that are being affected by these policies. It's not the people on Fifth Avenue that are bringing in, 7-8 figures a year. They don't care about a congestion tax or if Uber and Lyft have to raise their prices by 18-20%. That doesn't matter to them. It affects the little person. So I just wanted to show the light of these organizations or regulators. I call them organizations because they work for organizations. And they play rideshare drivers like fiddles. That's what they do. They found all these people that are discontent with these companies. They said, finally, we have waited for our tools, for our pawns, for our cause to bring these companies down, and we are going to use the rideshare drivers, the disgruntled rideshare drivers, or the disenfranchised drivers, are the ones that are just generally unhappy and we're going to use these people to bring them down. And it's already happening in New York. It started happening back in 2015. The assault on rideshare drivers was happening in 2014, 2015 in New York City. Taxis couldn't beat them then, so they waited and they waited and they waited. And then these drivers started complaining about, not making minimum wage. And then it's almost like the taxi cab association, for just to be nice, was like, yes, they're upset. Yes. Now we have people on the inside of the organization that we can use to bring them down. And it truly is sad. Because in the end, I think ultimately who loses in this entire situation is rideshare drivers will lose in the long term, and riders will lose in the long term. And whoever, who wins? The medallion owners, the medallion lenders. So all those people that lent out all that ridiculous amount of money for people to buy pieces of metal to stick on the front of cars, or wherever they stick the medallions. Those people, they're going to win. Why? Because the government is going to suffocate choice. It just boils down to the taxi cab companies, owners, medallion owners. They had and I repeat, no intentions of ever trying to actually compete against Uber and Lyft. Never. It was just a waiting game. Like, hey, do we have enough capital to get to the point to where we could get the government involved? Because that's the only way taxi cab companies have survived this long, is the government's involved. When the government regulates transportation, for-hire transportation, it protects the people that are in the know, right? So it doesn't allow the little guy to come in. And that's what Uber and Lyft did. It allowed just some Joe Schmo like myself to just pick up my keys in my car, sign into an app, and pick people up whenever I felt like it. And that threatened the very fabric or foundation of for-hire transportation forever. I mean, there was cracks all throughout the United States. And now the government in New York City is trying to sew those cracks back up. And through, the usage of rideshare drivers' despair or just unhappiness, they're going to get all these traditional companies are going to get the protections they need in order to be competitive again. They don't want to be competitive by trying to do it in the marketplace. They want the government to drive up pricing. And the way they do it is they go and they do things like minimum wage and all these other quote unquote protections. But in reality, it's not for the driver. It's not for the rideshare driver. Sorry. Like I said, you're just a pawn. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't going to see it right now. But the beautiful thing about technology, podcasts, YouTube channels, and everything else is 12, 24, 36 months down the road, this podcast episode will still be around. And we'll be able to look back and either say, well, apparently Chris was right, or, apparently Chris was wrong. I'm willing to bet based on historical, precedents that I'm right. And that government involvement is only going to drive pricing up and just pretty much kill the entire idea of moving forward and being innovative in transportation solutions. Because right now, unfortunately, some rideshare drivers are starting to act like taxi cab drivers did when Uber and Lyft first came along. And no, I want to keep everything the same like it always was. Because I don't want there to be innovations. I don't want there to be progress. I don't want more people to have more transportation options. I want more for me, and I get it because I'm all about me as well. But there's other ways to get for you. There's other ways for you to get for yourself. You just leverage these new technologies as they come along for as long as you can. And as soon as they innovate and they change and it no longer benefits you, you find the next one. I mean, seriously. Think about this for a second. And this is probably digressing a little bit, but I promise it's going to be really short, and then we're just going to end this episode. Think about this. In 2007, I think it was 2007. It was early 2000s. 2006, something like that. This whole thing like the iPhone started to come about, right? I believe that's when the first iPhone came out. Yeah, that's about right because it's 2019, 11. So we're just going to say around that time period, smartphones first started to really be utilized. And in 2010, 2011, Travis Kalanick, Garrett Camp, Logan Green, and John Zimmer started leveraging these things and said, what if we built apps that allowed people to request rides from each other? And it was a crazy idea, and it was a side hustle. Like Travis and Garrett didn't even think enough about Uber to even run it themselves. Like they literally hired out another person to run Uber for them. Like it wasn't until Uber really started taking off in San Fran that they were like, holy shit. Maybe we should take the company back over and kind of like focus on this and like ditch everything else that we're doing. So, and it's just blossomed in 9 years. We've gone from, a side hustle experiment to like literally hundreds of millions of people around the globe have access to transportation options that they didn't have just 9 years ago. It's crazy. They didn't even have it 6 years ago in most places. Like people are able to go earn money whenever they want. So, hey, I got 3 hours in between, when I need to be home and my job. Like, I'm just going to go earn, $80, $60, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't a thing in 2007, 2008, 2009. So I can only think that 9 years from today, the world is going to be so drastically different. So for all those people out there that want things to be like 2014, I've got a giant fucking newsflash for you. They will never be like 2014, 2015, or 2016 ever again. Never. Those days are gone. Open up your eyes to the new opportunities that are going to present themselves over the next 12 to 24 months that are going to present them to you like tomorrow. Hell, there's probably been opportunities that you've passed on because you get nostalgic. You think, oh, I can make it this way again. Guys, innovation is a crazy thing, right? Like it doesn't give a fuck if you want like old school shit. Innovation is just going to keep happening. You're going to keep getting new stuff. So I just wanted to do this episode because the appeals court obviously just made a decision on this. And I was like, wow, another instance where the TLC, the very group that some of these rideshare association groups championed for their hard, quote unquote, hard work for rideshare drivers, worked feverishly against rideshare drivers. And they've been working against rideshare drivers for years. And it really should make you question, was that whole minimum wage thing really for rideshare drivers? Or was that part of a bigger fight between the TLC, New York government, and, Uber and Lyft? I'm going to lean towards it had really nothing to do with Uber and Lyft drivers at all. You guys just happen to be easy targets. Like you crawled to them. So they were, and I'm sorry, not you, whoever's listening to this, but certain drivers in New York City crawled to them, begging them to do something about this. So they used you and they'll continue to use you. And that's kind of the moral of the story, guys, is government entities and regulators are just going to use you. I mean, you think Uber and Lyft are using you. Uber and Lyft aren't up for re-election every 4 years, okay? Politicians are going to use the shit out of you. And guess what? When you're no longer valuable and there's a new group of people that need to be saved, guess what? Politicians are going to throw your ass to the side just like they do every other group. That's what politicians do. Because guess what? Their job is on the line every 2, 4, or 6 years. So that's their attention span, is how do I win the next election? What group can I capitalize on to win the next election? And honestly, it's sad to say it. I mean, everybody like shits on Uber and Lyft, but I mean, honestly, at least, Uber and Lyft just throw it out in the terms. It's like, hey, this is what we're doing. If you don't like it, fuck off. Whereas politicians, these poor folks, they're living in poverty. Oh, there's another group. There's a bigger group of people that were affected by another tragedy. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sure you guys are victims, but these guys over here are even bigger victims. And our polling data suggests that if I champion their cause, I'll win the next election. Just food for thought, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the episode, hate the episode, throw down your comments in the comments section below, and have a great day.